So in our last couple videos, we learned the difference between additive 3D modeling and subtractive 3D modeling. And I like to think of subtractive 3D modeling as like wood carving. You have a big block of wood that you start with, and then you cut away piece by piece. But you never add to that block of wood once you start carving away. So you're just subtracting from it, hence the name subtractive method. It's almost like they thought it through before they gave it a name. Compare that to the additive method. The additive method is where you only build up. You don't ever cut away from your shape. You just add to it. I like to think of additive modeling as like 3D printing. If you look how a 3D printer works, it only adds to the extrusion. It doesn't ever build something and then bring in a laser and cut away other pieces. At least I've never seen a 3D printer like that. So you start with something and then you add to it piece by piece. And you might be wondering to yourself, well, do you have to build something through purely additive or through purely subtractive means? And the answer is no. You can build part of a shape through subtractive and part of the shape through additive. Whatever you need to do to get the shape built in general. I just want you to know the difference between the two methods. But let's explore that idea of building a shape partly through additive and then partly through subtractive by building shape 5. And I want to try to build this bottom platform through purely additive means, meaning I don't cut anything out of this bottom platform, I just build it up. And then I want to build this second block right here that comes out of the top of this bottom platform through the subtractive method. And so let's go ahead and start a new design. And let's hit Create New Sketch. And I want to build this platform. It looks like the easiest place to start would be our top view. And make sure that your word top is completely horizontal. It's not reading up and down or upside down whenever you start sketching. And grab your rectangle tool. And if I look what's going on here, I can see there's a rectangle of this platform, and then coming out of it, extending out of it, is this slanted, weird sort of oblong shape. And so let's just grab our rectangle tool and just drag it out some distance and click. And let's add the dimensions after the fact. And so I'm going to right click and hit cancel. And so this is the rectangle that I just built all the way to the back here. And I want to add these lines off to the side. So let me grab my line tool. And so if I move this over, I can connect my line tool to this corner and draw this slant over here. And then it goes straight back. And so I'll go straight up. And then I will just connect it here to this edge, right click and hit cancel, and I can adjust this as needed. Okay, and so we have this sort of general shape. If I go to my home view, maybe you can see it a little bit more clearly. But I'm just building this bottom platform. And so now that we have it built, let's go ahead and add to these dimensions. And the first dimension I want to do is the overall dimension from end to end. That is 2.25. So we'll grab our dimension tool and select these two edges, and we will tell it to be 2.25 and hit enter. I'm going to right click and hit cancel so I can adjust this rectangle as needed. If you look, it got a little bit too close. So I'll click on this rectangle and drag it in. It might have crossed over. That's no big deal. You just grab this end and bring it in, and it'll look a little bit more correct. And then let me click on this point right here and drag that in so it looks a little bit more like our shape should. Okay, and what else do I know? Well, I know the total distance from front to back is 0.75 plus another 0.75. Now, I'm bad at math, and so that might be hard to add up, but let me show you a trick that we can use in Fusion 360. I want to select my dimension tool, and I want to click from the front to the back. And instead of doing the math myself, what I'm going to do, since I know this depth is 0.75 plus 0.75, I'm going to type in literally in my dimension 0.75 plus 0.75 and hit enter, and it'll actually do the math for me. It turns out it's 1.5. Okay, so what else do we know? Well, I know that this width from this edge to our slant is 1.25, so I'll click on these two edges, and I will tell that to be 1.25 and hit enter. And if you look, we only have two more constraints to figure out. I'm going to right click and hit cancel. And whenever I have constraints that I need to figure out, I like to click on them and drag them around to kind of make sure I understand the dimension I need to add to fully constrain this sketch. And this one's kind of obvious. I haven't added any kind of length. This one's a little less obvious. Let's click on it and see if we can figure it out. And it looks like we didn't fully constrain this line. We didn't give it a horizontal constraint when we built it. You might have actually. Yours might be black. It looks like I just missed a constraint when I was building it. It didn't magnetize perfectly. Maybe it was just like that. It was almost horizontal. I don't know. And like I said, yours might be horizontal already. But how do we fix this if this happens to us? Well, the first thing we need to do is diagnose that we understand the problem. I want this line to be perfectly perpendicular to this line. Okay, I also want it to be parallel or collinear to this line. And so I can use any one of those constraints. I could use my parallel constraint and tell these two lines to be parallel. I could go in and find my collinear constraint and tell these two lines to be collinear. That would do the same thing. But I want to use my perpendicular constraint. And I want to tell these two lines to be perpendicular forever and always, which gives me that constraint. And if you already have this line as black, then you don't need to add that perpendicular constraint. In fact, it won't even let you. It'll tell you you are over constraining the sketch if you try to add it afterwards. Let me right click and hit cancel. And so now we have one constraint left here to add. And what is the length of this line? Well, it doesn't actually tell us, does it? It tells us a height. And you might think, well, that's the same because it's a square. But you don't know that it's a square. It doesn't actually tell you it's a square. So you can't know the length of that line. This is a height, and it is the height of this entire platform that we're building. And remember, a height is not the same as depth. And so what does it tell us about this line? Well, it tells us an angle. Well, okay, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, Mr. Anderson, I don't know how to put down an angle. Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. Let's grab our dimension tool and we can learn. If you look, it's an angle between this line and this line. So I'm just going to use my dimension tool and select those two lines and drag it in the correct direction and type in 45. And since these two lines are not parallel to each other, it automatically makes it an angle. It's automatically measured in degrees. And that's essentially how angle dimensions work. If I have my dimension tool selected and I select two lines that are parallel, it'll give me a distance. Right click, cancel, and let me deselect. I'm going to grab my dimension tool again. But if I grab two lines that are not parallel, like these two lines, it'll give me an angle instead. Right click, cancel. And that's all there is to adding angle dimensions. Hopefully that's pretty straightforward. And if you look, we have this fully constrained sketch. It even has this red lock on it. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, Mr. Anderson, okay, this is a fully constrained sketch, but it's actually two shapes. I want it to be one shape. And we could use the trim tool and trim this off if we wanted to. But if you look when we do, it unconstrains a few things. I'm going to right click and hit cancel and undo that. And the trim tool is really useful. We'll learn how to use it more in detail in later videos. But for now, it doesn't really matter that these are separated into two shapes. And let me try to explain why. Let's go to Finish Sketch and hit Extrude. And what I can do is I can just select both of these shapes together in one and drag it up. And now it just extrudes as one body. And so how high does it extrude up? Well, it goes up 0.5, and so I'll type in 0.5. And we built this bottom platform here through purely additive means. We didn't cut away anything. We just added to our extrusion. But like I said at the beginning of this video, I want to try and build this block that extrudes out of it through purely subtractive means. So I'm going to build an entire rectangular block and then cut out this triangle cut after the fact. And so I'm going to select this top face and go to New Sketch. And I want to build this rectangular piece. So let me grab my rectangle tool. I'm going to tell it to be coincident with this top left corner before I drag and click again. I'm going to right click and hit OK and go to my home view so I can get a better look at what I'm trying to dimension here. And what are my other two dimensions? Well, if I look, this is clearly 1.25. And so let me deselect and grab my dimension tool. And so I'll select the distance between these two edges is 1.25. And what about the distance between these two edges? What about the location of this line? Well, if I look up here, it's 0.75. Okay, so I will use these two. and type in 0.75. And then we have a fully constrained rectangle, so I can finish my sketch and extrude this shape upward. And how tall does it go? Well, it goes 1 inch tall, so I'll type in 1 and hit enter. And okay, it's starting to look a little bit more like this shape, but we still need to cut out this triangle here. So that's pretty easy. I'm going to click on this face right here and do a new sketch. And I'm just going to grab my line tool, and I just want to connect these two edges. And I want to be careful not to accidentally select the center so I can add the dimensions afterwards. If I select the center, it'll be constrained to the center, and then I'll have to delete the line and try again. But I want to connect it from this edge to this edge. Be careful to miss your center, like I said. And then right click and hit cancel. And then we can add our dimensions. And so what are the dimensions I know? Well, I know the length from this edge to the edge of our slant is 0.5. So that's from here to here is 0.5. Hit OK. And I know the distance from this edge to the edge of our slant is also 0.5. And mine moved a little bit too far down. Let me right click out of my dimension tool and just drag that dot up a little bit. I can adjust it as needed. And then grab my dimension tool again. And from this dot to this bottom edge here is also 0.5. And hit enter. And if I go to my home view, hopefully it makes those two dimensions a little bit more clear. Yes, they're in the front instead of the back, but this height and this width doesn't change from front to back. So I have a fully constrained sketch. I'm going to go ahead and finish my sketch and extrude, cut this shape out and go from distance to all and hit OK. And there you have it. We have shape 5. And bonus, we built part of it through the additive method, and then we built part of it through the subtractive method. And so yes, you can combine the two concepts to build tougher shapes. In fact, it's probably encouraged to. Let's make sure we save this as shape 5. Hit save, and I want to double check that it actually saved within our data panel, and there it is, and we are done with this shape.